when we see these things happening, we can't go and say, oh, it's God's judgment, it's God's wrath. We know godly people that are going to go through the storms. I know there was one of the tornadoes that hit like in Battlefield or something. A friend of mine's mom was killed by some debris, and she was one of the most godly women you would ever meet. Had a great relationship with God. Went to her funeral and had to stand in line for like an hour and a half just to say condolences to her daughter, because that's how many people were there at the funeral, and it wasn't because she wasn't a godly person that she died in the tornado, but when there's debris flying around, it can hit the just and the unjust. And if we're not in a place of safety, we can be just as susceptible to it as anyone else. So it's not people that are wicked that are getting hit by the storm, or God telling Florida, oh, they should have voted a different way in the election, or whatever kind of stuff people come up with. It was a little easier for them when it hit New Orleans, because they could at least say, well, they got Mardi Gras and they got all kinds of occult down there, but it's not all the people are doing that. And God doesn't work like that. First of all, God's judgment begins in his house and with his people, and God's judgment goes to the Jew first and then to the Gentile. And that's not the way his wrath is manifest in these days. As a matter of fact, in Romans, we see how it is manifest. Romans chapter 1. And we've looked at this before, but it's good to be reminded. Romans chapter 1, it says in verse 18, Romans 1:18, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth in their wickedness, since what may be known of God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. And for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. And he talks about how they knew God, but they didn't acknowledge him as God, that they became foolish in their hearts, that they exchanged the glory of God for images of man and reptiles. And then in verse 24 it says, therefore God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie. They worship and serve the creature or created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. And because of this, God gave them over to shameful lust, even their women exchanging natural relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust with one another, men committing indecent acts with other men, and received in themselves the due penalty of their perversion. And this is the wrath of God and how it's revealed in our time. The wrath of God is revealed that as people reject God, he turns them over to a reprobate mind. He turns them over to their sinful desires. And the full manifestation of that is when they get to the point of homosexuality and rejecting of natural relationships of men with women and women with men. And it becomes evil, unnatural manifestation of what they call love in our society. And we saw that happening in our country, where as abortion came in and became predominant in our country, and back in January 22nd of 1973, the Roe versus Wade became law, and abortion became legal in our country, and continued to murder innocent babies. And as they continued to get turned over 40 years later, which is often considered a generation, on January 21st of 2013, Barack Obama came into term for the second time and talked about how he was going to make sure that homosexuals were able to be, have the same rights as other people. And sure enough, the court system, a small handful of men and women, decided for the entire country that now homosexuality and homosexual marriage is going to be allowed in our country, and all the states have to accept it, even if the states had on their constitutions that they would not. And we've seen America being turned over to the wrath of God, and that's the manifestation of the wrath of God. Now, the other aspect of the judgment of God is where he's saying, okay, this is what you want, here's what you got. So he gave them government, gave them a man of government with Barack Obama, and government taking over healthcare, taking over all these things. Now we've got a man in the office that's going to do things the way a man's going to do it. And, you know, people are going to be really happy about some things he did and really unhappy about other things he does. And they're going to take all this money and try to pour it into this place and really help people with all this money. And then we're going to see how that's going to all come crashing down. And it's not going to work. It's not going to work. You know, one of the biggest problems with government, one of the biggest problems with man doing things, one of the biggest problems with like throwing money at disasters and all these different things that happens, you know, one of the biggest problems is corruption. You know how much money gets wasted with corruption? You know, governments are really good at corruption. Government.
No.
When we have corrupt men in a corrupt system doing corrupt things, it gets to be a mess. You know, our world is a mess today because of corruption. There is absolutely no reason why, with the technology we have today, with the resources we have today, with the knowledge we have today, there's absolutely no reason for there to be people in this world that are starving to death.
That's right.
There's absolutely no reason for people to be in this world that don't have adequate clothes or housing.
That's right.
But you can't get it to them because of all the corruption between. And then you also have a very capitalist idea that some of the people that have a lot of money have, and it's like, if I can't make money doing it, then how am I going to do it? And it costs money to do it because you got to bribe this government official, and you got to pay this permit, and you got to do all this kind of stuff, and it's all the corruption getting in the way, stopping the love of God from flowing in this country. Man, I look forward to a time when our world is run by the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. I look forward to a time when the people of the world are submitted to God as King, and He is able to do what needs to be done because the help is available. The resources are there. The food exists. The technology is here. The ability to heal and to bring life to people exists. But it's not getting to the people that need to get there because there's too much corruption in between. We need the glorious power of the sons of God to come in, tear down that corruption, beat through all the red tape, and go and bring life to those places that need to have life. Because government's not the answer.
No.
Man's not the answer. God's kingdom is the answer. The King of Kings being who He's supposed to be, and people surrendered to Him. That almost sounds like that would preach.